Welcome everybody to the Paramedic Services Committee for Monday, June 6, 2022. I'm going to start the meeting noting that attendance has been taken and everyone is here. Can I get a motion for the approval of the agenda? Mayor Davis, Mayor Bailey, any comments to that? Okay, we'll vote. All those in favor? And that is approved. Next, any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we'll move forward. We have no delegations, petitions, or presentations. Can I get a motion for the adoption of the minutes from the previous meeting? Mayor Davis, Councillor Pierce, any discussion? All those in favor? Approved. Okay, any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, we'll move forward. Consent items to be approved and received. There are none. We will go right to staff reports. First, we have the Paramedic Services Budget 8.1, budget to actual variance at April 30th. And Heather can speak to this before we make a motion.
I'm here for questions. We appear to be on budget at this time.
Okay. Any questions for Heather? Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'm not sure if it's Heather that can respond to this or not, but when we're talking, it's on page 8, when it talks about the fuel is expected to be a significant cost pressure, which we all know the price of fuel has just gone through the roof. Do we have any idea as to, last few years we've paid X number of dollars for fuel, what we anticipate the difference might be this year? I'm not sure if anybody has that information or not.
Thank you, John. Heather, are you ready to speak to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can do a comparison and try to estimate that out. It probably still will be very much an estimate, but we can work through that for the next report.
Okay. No, I'd appreciate that. Like I say, as we all know, the cost of fuel has just gone through the roof, and it'd be interesting to understand and just, to let the public know that, hey, due to that, we've got an increase of cost here as well. So I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Welcome.
Mayor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Heather. Looking at the summary, which is the last page of the report, I think. Yeah. And the line 15, 4,000 paramedics, the actual amount on paramedics is under 3 million, but the budget projection for the same period says 3,700,000 and change. Why is that? I would have anything thought it'd be actual would be higher than budget.
Heather, would you like to speak to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the budget to date is just 1/3, so it's just a simple math. I haven't done any projections in those numbers.
So the budget figure would include the bump up that comes in July with the additional ambulance.
Yep.
Resource. Okay, thank you.
That's okay. That's everything. Anybody else? Well, can I get a mover for the recommendation to receive as information? Councillor Vanderstelt moves, seconded by Mayor Davis. Any more discussion? All those in favor? So moved. Let's see here. We have 8.2. An amendment to the shared services agreement budget schedule in an election year. Heather Boyd, two Heathers here. Heather Boyd, would you like to speak to this? Our General Manager of Corporate Services.
Yep. Good morning, through you, Mr. Chair. This is just an agreement that we've been working on with the City Treasury folks. Just when the original new agreements were made up, we didn't fully go through what a budget in an election year would look like. So to avoid one council or the other having to be completely through the budget system, we're just going to move everything back a bit. And we'll be presenting that. We're presenting it to our Policy Development Committee next week, and the city will be presenting it to, I think, their Committee of the Whole next week. So the full reports will come then.
Okay, so this is something that's been worked on by both municipalities.
Yep, and this is just a heads up for this committee.
Excellent, thank you. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, can I get a motion to receive as information? Moved by Mayor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Pierce. Discussion? All those in favor? So moved.
Can we take a recess? We're not streaming right now.
Okay, we're going to have to take a recess because we are not streaming. So we'll just take a break until our streaming is corrected. 5 minutes. minutes or at the call of the chair. And it's still a public meeting in terms of anybody being able to walk in. And just wait for Councillor Vandersloot to pop back in. Russ, while we're waiting for Councillor Vandersloot, are you able to camera on and you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Well, how do we feel? Should we begin? We can wait another minute or two. I did say 5 minutes, so. Councillor Vandersloot's back. Councillor Vandersloot, just to update you, we aren't able to stream live, but it's still a public meeting and doors are open. We're going to record and put this on as soon as possible. It's still recording though. So we're just going to begin. We're at 8.3, begin again. Expanded community paramedicine funding. Russell, are you able to speak to this?
Good morning, everybody. Yes, over the last couple of months, Glenn Kinane, our Deputy Chief, had worked with the province to expand the funding. It's just another component to our community paramedic program, from being a community paramedic response, the long-term care, the palliative programs. Now they've extended out the additional funding to include mental health and working with the local Coast team and St. Leonard's. So the information was provided just to let you know exactly what the program will do, and we hope that with the province that we'll be able to expand for additional years. Right now, it's only paid for until March 31st of 2023. But from our last OAPC conference with all the paramedic chiefs of Ontario, the province is looking at investing almost $60 million into the community paramedic program and expanding its current services and programs.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Russ? Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Russ. First of all, it looks as though you're in a much better place than we are. I can see sun shining behind you, so congrats on that. Anyway, I've always been an advocate of the paramedicine project. I think it's a fantastic project, and I think, as you say, even though the province waits to the last minute to advise us they're continuing on the funding, I feel confident that that will continue, because I'm sure that they have to see the benefit of it as well. A couple questions I have. When it talks about successful getting the 421,000 there, can you tell me how much more that is than what we were getting? And then if we can transfer that into the fact of, how many additional people do you think we can help with this? How many additional hours would this potentially give more bodies from the paramedic side, or just the same number of bodies from the paramedic side being just able to help more people for a longer period of time? Can you expand on that for me?
Chief King?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Since the development of the community paramedic program in 2015, right, there's been additional components. Right now, we anticipate with all components included that we defer or basically help and defer people out of the emergency department about 5,000 of our calls a year. So add them onto our existing call volumes right now, we would be doing about 33,000 calls projected for 2022. The province has seen a great value in using our paramedics because we can basically mobilize in a very, very short period of time. But this $421,000 adds on to the $281,000 we already get from community paramedic, the $1.1 million annually for the long-term care programs. Those combined and stuff like this, I believe, and this is only an estimation and a guess, we're receiving a little over $2 million a year from the province to help with these outreach type programs and community paramedics. We have to run it separately, from our day-to-day budget because it is a separate entity. We have a separate audit process. We have a separate reporting process for the government, and it's just a separate entity. But we use our paramedics that are on the road. It has been a challenge with staffing because we're trying to staff frontline and the community paramedic program at the same time. If we defer from the community paramedic program, in my opinion, that means our call volumes will go up. So it's a very hard balance to maintain both sides. And as well, every other service in the province is struggling with hiring paramedics. So it's a very, very tight balance. It is benefiting the community, but it is stretching our human resources.
Right. Just quick follow-up if I could, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that, Russ. So I just want to confirm what you were saying there. This 421 is in addition to the 281 that we were receiving, or we're now bumped up to that 421?
It's a different line on the budget. So if the province decided tomorrow to stop the funding for the mental health aspect of this community paramedic program, that 421,000 would stop. The 281,000 for the community paramedic program now and the long-term care programs will continue. These are almost like add-ons or components. So that's every line, every reporting structure has to be completely separate in the event that they stop funding, which I do not believe they will.
Right. Okay, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you very much, Russ.
Perfect. You just hit your time there, John. So Councillor Sless.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Russ, you indicated that the 421 is coming from the province, but in the background it says it's coming from Ontario Health West. What is that?
The Ontario Health, through you, Mr. Chair, the Ontario Health West is the health team that's in our community. So basically the province gives the money to the Ontario Health West. They help us apply for these different grants and different programs that are out there. We do a submission on behalf of them, and they basically fund the money through them to us. It's not a direct line from the province in.
Okay, that explains. I was kind of confused there. I wasn't sure exactly where the money was coming from. Okay, then I get. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sless.
Sorry about that, Councillor.
Nope, that's okay. Anybody else? Okay, how would committee like to proceed? We have a recommendation to receive as information. Can I get a mover? Mayor Bailey, Mayor Davis, all those in favor? Everybody went to move it, so everybody's in favor. Okay, great. And we have Michael Bradley, our CEO, is going to speak to the paramedic statistical package, as well as Chief King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, our bi-monthly statistical package is before you. Russell's here to answer any questions. Just a quick note that we did expand this report from its normal kind of content for this month. We thought it would be a good, I think your next meeting you'll be seeing the first draft of the budget, and we thought some of the themes that are in this report would be applicable to be showing committee. Specifically, we talked a little more about the trending call volume challenge that, I use that term lightly, challenge the paramedic services across the province are facing. We also benchmark the service against the traditional other services that we usually benchmark against. So again, Russell's here, and I'm here as well to answer any questions. Thank you.
I see Mayor Davis has his hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I have three questions. The first question I have is, In respect to what we're doing in July, which is we're adding a half ambulance to the capacity of the service. So Chief Kings, do you think that will address the capacity issue? Will we then come back to statistics and response times that would be more acceptable?
Bradley?
Through you, Mr. Chair, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Sorry. Through you, Mr. Chair, we all have been talking for the past 2 years on the effects of COVID for the service. We didn't know what was going to happen at the end of COVID. The call volumes have increased beyond our expectations. And in my statistical report I have provided, I have already included the additional vehicle starting July 1st, and we are maintaining 100% capacity. For the last couple of months, with the addition to offload delays and our call volumes, we've had to, as we've done in previous years, upstaff additional vehicles to try to maintain coverage within the city and in the county at the same time. So right now, this is our expectations when we approved this approximately 18 months ago, is to give us a little bit of a cushion. Right now, with the call volume and the increase after COVID, right, our cushion has been eroded, and we are maintaining at 100% capacity and even exceeding it on some days.
Follow-up question to that, Chief King. So, is bumping up an additional half ambulance, is that adequate, or is there more required?
Through you, Mr. Chair, at this point in time, with the increasing COVID and the delays that we are seeing, it is not adequate, and we would need additional resources. It's referred in our statistical report. Michael Bradley and myself are working on ideas to try to provide the group suggestions on how we can move forward.
All right. And so when another service is responding in another area to a call in our area, are we charged for that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we are charged for each call when they arrive on scene. Even if they do not transport, it's a call in our area. Between our existing surrounding services, what we do is we balance it out at the end of the year. An example being, if Hamilton does 700 calls in our area and we do 100, we are only charged for the 600. We work with their financial group, Heather Mifflin and myself, right, to basically balance it off and either receive funds, which is rare, or we do pay out what they requested. The rate per call by the province of Ontario.
Right. And if the current trend line continues for this year, which has us, I think, calling upon outside areas more than they call on us, what will that cost be? Do you have a projection on that? Like the net between what they will pay us for what we respond to in their area and what they're responding to sort of over the last 6 months in our area.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Heather and I had worked on it, and we've only can forecast because we did the budget approximately a year ago. It would be anywhere from between $70,000 and $100,000.
Okay. My last question is, we know the hospital's next planned expansion for the Brantford facility, and they're getting close to beginning it, is the doubling of the capacity of the emergency department, which will occur in 2 stages. Do you believe that will be one of the longer-term solutions to the offloading problem, i.e. increasing the capacity of the emergency department?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, I believe it will be a helping factor. But according to the statistics that we've looked at in the past, right, what we call the tsunami of aging population and population growth is supposed to peak at 2028. Right now we're at 2022. So basically it'll be like a race to get to that peak, because after that peak and stuff like this, they believe things will normalize and stabilize. But that's only projection from the stats that StatsCan has given us in the past.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just hit your time as well. Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Russ and Michael there. First of all, yeah, I like this report. There's a lot of good information in it, and it allows us to, to see the trends increasing. And I mean, there's no way not to see, in the last number of years, we've gone up 50% for our call volume. So that's scary in itself, but as we say, there's other factors for that. Okay, a couple of questions I do have. One of them's already been asked, but when we talk about the offload times, if we look at that on the bottom of page 18 there, when it displays all the offload times back from 215, and we look at the time on task, if we're looking at time on task, and for quite some time now, we were talking that because of the offload times, that's really increasing our time on task. But if we look at the stats there, for example, from 2018 up, and especially if we look at 2019 and 2020, I understand COVID was in there, but if we look at the offload times, they're actually much lower than this year to date. If we look at it, 5 and 6 minutes lower, yet the time on task was longer for those 2 specific years, but overall within those. So I'm trying to understand here, and I know we've talked about this at length, are there other factors here other than the offload times that are causing the time on task to be greater, even though, as I say, for those two particular years, the offload time is like 5 minutes or so less? Any thoughts on that, Russ?
Russ?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Pierce. Through you, Mr. Chair. There are different factors that are affecting the time on task. First of all, right now through COVID, it was a gowning, double gowning before we went into the call, cleanup afterwards and stuff like this was added as additional time on task for every vehicle. We also had to send our vehicles at that point in time to our decom bay. Each vehicle that had a COVID case at the beginning of COVID had to be decanted. We used a mister and stuff like this that took approximately 30 minutes to an hour before that vehicle was available again. And also we're dealing with people that have been at home a lot longer with more critical calls. The intervention at scene and stuff like this has taken us a longer period of time with the paramedics. So those are 2 of the driving factors that we are dealing with right now. And also the time on task also includes outside ambulances coming into our area. So the time that they come in is also calculated through. So if we're getting a vehicle coming from, we'll say Norfolk, they've got a 40-minute drive by the time they get here and do the patient and stuff like this, right? It's very rare for the longer drives, but there's a bunch of factors that affect our time on tasks.
Okay. No, I appreciate that answer, because I just want to, and I've always been an advocate myself that I feel that, the wait times are really, making things difficult, which they are. There's no question about that. But I just wanted to, to get the point out there that there are other factors as well. So thank you for that answer. And I know we've spoken on it on the Police Services Board as well. Mayor Bailey could attest to that. That paramedics aren't the only ones feeling the delays at the hospital. The police services are, of whether it be OPP or Brantford Police, they're feeling the same. So back to what Mayor Davis was saying there in regards to what they're doing and what they're going to be doing at BGH. I think it's long overdue, and I can't wait to get ourselves. I wish we could fast forward a couple of years to be in that position, but hopefully it will help. And I can only see that the calls are going to increase by then, so it'll be much overdue. So appreciate that, and thanks again for all you do, Russ.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I'm going to speak a little bit here. I had the opportunity in the last 2 months to speak to 2 different people who work at different paramedic services who sometimes serve Brantford Brant, and they both commented about how offload times are bad everywhere, but particularly tough at the BGH. So just a reminder to keep our advocacy up on this and our support for those sort of changes. Again, it seemed like very honest conversations. Yeah, it's bad here, it's bad there, it's bad here, but it's particularly an issue at the BGH. It's, a soft quote from 2 different folks who are paramedics in 2 different services who do service when those calls that come in from other communities. So just interesting, and I wanted to bring that up here. The other is a question. Would it be possible, and I know this will be finalized by new committee, new councils, but I think something that may have been missing, or maybe clearly, maybe it was there but not as clear in previous budgets where we've talked about having new ambulance hours, new ambulances, etc. I wonder if we could get an analysis specifically about new ambulance versus calling into other communities and using that as a bit of an analysis to look at, should we go with the half, should we go with the full, and what time of year, etc. I'm sure you're probably already working on that, but I just feel like I'd be remiss to not say that should be specifically in the budget, especially in the decision packages. Is that doable? I don't know who I'm
Mr. Chair, I
asking.
believe so. We are coming up with other ideas. When I met and referring to everybody's questions, adding in additional ambulances, BGH, and hospital delays, it's the funding, the way we staff our services may not be working. So for an example, and I'm just going to use a quick comparator between the fire service and us, we rely heavily on part-time staff, meaning last-minute call-ins, people coming in, filling vacation shifts. Where a fire service or a police service overstaff, use the additional vehicles and stuff like this for vacation time, for stat time, and staff additional vehicles so that if me and my partner are sick that day, right, we've already have additional trucks on, and it just basically decreases the complement. There's many ideas that we're working on right now. Before I go into greater detail and stuff like this, before we have any other additional questions, Michael and I are working on solutions. And when we're ready and stuff like this, we'll be able to present them to the group. But everybody's looking at different ways of service delivery, and that came out of our OAPC conference back in May.
Thank you, Chief King. Michael, you want to speak to this as well?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I thought I just wouldn't mind making a few comments. And I think what we're seeing, if you read this report and if you look more broadly, we're in a bit of the whole healthcare system, the broader healthcare system is in a bit of a period of challenge. The long-term care sector, the hospital sector, the physician care sector, all those sectors, we're all in the same boat. And there's really I think there's two choices. We just continue to add resources, and so we can add them, or other people like the hospital can add them, and Mayor Davis made some comments to that about infrastructure improvements in the hospital. But I don't think that's really the best solution. That's part of the solution. But I think the better solution is to start changing the model of care. And I'm not an expert. Russ and his team are experts on this. But I think there's two places that we need to be looking at that model of care. And I just wrote them down here. We need to make local change. So that's change to our own system, and including how we interface with those other parts of the system. So, for example, and it was noted in the report, Russ and I are queuing up a meeting with the executive team at the hospital to talk about how can we better use their resource, share their real estate to try to get our crews back on the road. And I think there's some options. Russ and I have talked about some options to that. There might be a bit of spending attached to that, but it might be wise spending. And then, as Russ mentioned, looking at our own deployment model, the ambulance system is structured on a pretty common deployment model, but I think there's some change to that model in terms of how we utilize full-time or part-time resources, and how we use, maybe we use staff a little differently. So that's the local change, but then I think there's systemic change that has to happen too, and I've been talking about this for years. We've had several meetings with various ministers, and it's the shift towards home care, and that's why I thought it was good that we put that report earlier today about the community paramedicine program, because I think that's a place that we need to invest in. We being the healthcare system, keeping people at home as opposed to getting them into an already burdened hospital system. I think paramedics have a big role to play in that. I think we also need to look at the standards. So Russ is it was good to mention in his update the audit we just went through with the province, and there's a very complex regulatory system that governs how we run this paramedic service, and I think some of it needs to change because it's got some old habits in it that might not be working anymore. And I think there's changes to the dispatch model. We're kind of sandwiched in between the dispatch and the hospital. And I think that we kind of get towed along in the resourcing challenges that whole system creates. So I think dispatch, how paramedics are dispatched into the community needs to change. So, those systemic changes are kind of out of our hands. I think that's more into your hands, to be quite frank. I think that's where we need to be getting in front of the ministers regularly at the conferences. Russ and the work that he does with his paramedic chiefs group is very important in that. And I think those are the two levels of change that we, jointly all have to take on to fix this problem, because otherwise we're just going to continually throw resources at it. And I think that's a long and costly road to go down. So just those comments. Those are the things that we're talking about as a staff group in the service, and I'm looking forward to talking about it further. Thank you.
Thank you. Either of you, Michael or Chief King, several years ago, last time we were in person, the province had announced later that day that they were going to create 13 mega regions for ambulance. Is that idea dead in the water? I haven't heard a thing about it in 3 years. Or is it, but I also haven't heard that it's been canceled as an idea. Is there any update on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have heard nothing regarding that, and from what the overall feeling is, that has been canceled.
Okay, but it hasn't been officially announced as not happening. Okay. Any first-time speakers? Okay, Mayor Davis would like a second kick at the can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Bradley, two things. So I found it interesting you mentioned home care, because I was speaking to someone on the weekend who's in that industry, that sector, and they said the funding for it hasn't increased at the same rate that in other sectors of healthcare spending, and eventually it's starting to catch up to us now. They're having trouble finding staff and keeping staff because they have to keep a real lid on their wages they pay. But speaking of the systemic change, you mentioned that we should be lobbying, and wondering, I assume you're going to AMO in August, and I haven't asked for a meeting with anyone from the Ministry of Health. Are you taking that on? Do you need any help, or?
I think if this committee was interested in getting in front of the Minister of Health, we could certainly take that on, and if both parties could step forward to that meeting, it would be beneficial. I think all of the paramedic service municipalities need to be doing this. So.
I think maybe we can make that direction to staff.
Yeah, because we've done that before. I recall one summer we made a joint presentation, and I think it carries a lot more weight than if we're doing it individually. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, how would committee like to deal with this? Would we like to move to receive his information? Councillor Pierce, and a seconder? You have a question?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, do we need to just move and then just a recommendation to staff to put something forward for AMO, or I'd like to have that in there for sure?
Sure, that works for me.
Thank you.
Does somebody want to second that? Councillor Vanderstelt. It's interesting looking at two planes of vision to try and figure out who's voting for what. But okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Okay, we have the Chief's update.
Let's see if this works. To you, Mr. Chair, I'm just trying to find that page. Okay, so our update is our service has just completed, as Michael Bradley referred to, our service review with the province. They came back with three minor recommendations. The minor recommendations have been completed, and the next review will not be for the additional 3 years. I'd just like to thank Deputy Chief Kevin Robinson for his team for putting our submission together. Our service has been successful since 2000 when I arrived, and now Kevin is in charge of doing the service review, so he's done an excellent job. During the last few months, we've seen a reduction in COVID-related calls and instances to our paramedics being for offloads for COVID-related incidents. But for our calls right now have decreased, but the service calls have increased. Sorry, I'm trying to read off a page and look off two screens. So overall, our calls for COVID have decreased, but the calls for service have increased. A note of my report for offload delays has to continue to put pressure on our service delivery. Currently, as noted in my report, we are operating at or over 100% capacity on most days. Michael Bradley and I are setting up additional meetings with the executive team with the BGH to try to develop some out-of-box solutions for this problem, such as getting some real estate and expanding the offload nurse program. At our OAPC conference, the province has said that they are committed to doubling the cost of our funding for our offload delay program. One of the things that our OAPC executive worked on is, rather than only relying on RNs to staff that area, they would allow paramedics to help staff that area due to the shortages of the RNs. Legislation will follow, but I think it's a great idea, because if we can use our resources to help with the offload delays, we're not solely relying on hospital staffing to do so. That might get our vehicles faster out on the road. With the increasing of offload delays and the increased call volume, that our service pressures are having a negative impact on the paramedics, and they are feeling the stress and having a large impact on morale. On many occasions, they've missed their meal breaks and have extended overtime at the end of each additional shift. We've even used taxis on the crews coming in at night to drive them up to the hospital to relieve the crews that are still on extensive offload delays. 2 weeks ago, we celebrated the paramedic services Paramedic Services Week and did a number of small things to help demonstrate that we appreciate the work that our medics do in the community. I'd like to thank Mayor Davis and Mayor Bailey for putting the positive messages together. Michael Bradley and I are also have had some productive meetings with Grandbridge Energy on our new location. We did meet with them next week to review some questions that they had. And on a sad note, this past week, our service lost a fellow colleague and friend, Doug Macarthur. Doug Macarthur was a...
I think I know what's happening right now. Yeah, I think he's just, Russ, you've muted. I don't know if it was just to tell some kids to be quiet, but. You back, Russ? Oh, there we go.
Sorry, I don't know where I ended. I tapped my earpiece and I guess it muted it at the same time.
No worries. You were discussing somebody, I believe, who had passed.
Okay, sorry, I'll go back. Sorry, thank you very much. Yes, on a sad note, this past weekend, our service lost a fellow colleague and friend, Doug Macarthur. He was one of our paramedic supervisors in the community for 23 years. He was a paramedic in the system for over 40 years. It was just sudden on the weekend. It was unexpected, but our crews did attend to his house and stuff, so the service is feeling a little bit of stressors at this point in time. We're looking at funeral arrangements with his family, and currently our flags are at half-mast at some of our stations and stuff like this, just as support. If you have any questions, please let me know at this point in time on my report or any of the other documentations that we have provided you today.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Russ. Any questions? Councillor Pierce.
A comment, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Please.
A couple condolences, Russ, for you and your staff there. You know, I've always said that Russ, you and your team have a way to think out of the box, and you just made a statement there that you've gone to getting taxis to get the crews from the station up to the hospital for offload times. I just want to say kudos on that, because I mean that to me is just another example of thinking out of the box of what you need to do in order to make things better for your staff. And I mean, you've got staff that are waiting up there, let's say their shift is done. And again, I just want to say thank you for the multiple ways that you folks think out of the box. And that's just one fantastic example there to, you know what, that crew has done their shift. Let's get them off. The only way to do it is to get other staff up there. So I just pulled that out of your report there, Russ, and that's, I appreciate that. And I'm sure the staff that were being relieved would appreciate that sort of work as well. So that's just kudos to you and your team.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor. We have been doing it for about 3 to 5 years right now, but it is ramping up increasingly. Like our first cost for taxis for 1 year may have only been $200, and we're spending in excess of maybe between $500 and $700 a month just to get this happening. So just compounding the problem, but I do appreciate the acknowledgement.
It's those costs that we keep hearing about that are these trickle effects from sort of a source issue. So it's good to get that 360 view on it. So thank you again, Chief King. Councillor Sless, I see your hands up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just an inquiry. Is it automatic that we as a service send flowers or make donations when we lose an employee? Is that automatic, or does that require a resolution of this committee?
I'll get Michael to answer that one.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, we have a process internally to do that.
Okay, so we're being represented. That was my concern. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, can I get a mover of the recommendation to receive this information? Or actually, we don't need one for the chief's update, so we can move on. Thank you, Russ. Much appreciated. We have no communications, no other business, other than I'll just say that, before I was chair of the paramedics, I maybe was in contact with an ambulance service once in my entire life, and since being chair, it's maybe I'm noticing it more, and maybe it's issues in my life and neighbors and such, but it's like twice a year I'm in contact for some personal use or a neighbor or something, and I just want to say it's incredible service, and it's not just the work and the professionalism, but it's also the reassurance, right? The reassurance to the old man who was a neighbor of my mom who had fallen, and it's the reassurance to him and his family. It's the reassurance to my son, again, tubes in his nose and being taken care of. That's a above and beyond service, right? And I'm very sorry to hear that morale is low, and we need to do things to work on that. And hopefully, what Michael and Russ were talking about in terms of some innovation will help, and some local change, et cetera. Despite hearing about morale being low, and you can understand why, the actual service and the sort of user dynamic is excellent, and that's across the province. So I just wanted to say that. I'd be remiss to not. We have no in-camera, so our next meeting is August 8th here in Council Chambers or via Zoom, hybrid until we say otherwise. Can I get a motion to adjourn? So moved. Okay, thanks everybody.